Hello.
Hey, what's up?
Good. How are you?
I'm alive. I'm alive.
So
Good to
today
see you.
I'm going to be interviewing my older sister, Macy,
Yay.
about the water crisis and her opinions on the subject. So are you ready?
Well, yeah, thanks for asking me. I mean, I'm not in Michigan, so I have limited
You're not.
information, but I will try my best.
Okay.
Cool.
So first, before we start, do you know about orthophosphates?
Science word. Um, I think, or you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think orthophosphates wasn't that what was used in the pipes in
Is
Flint?
what
It's like a
was it?
chemical. It wasn't,
Yeah.
well, it wasn't, but yeah, it's like a chemical coating in pipe.
Right.
Yeah.
So basically, like it's a coating that's on the pipe that prevents contaminants to get into the water, which is what
Yeah.
Flint didn't add to their pipes, which is why there's lead, iron, copper, all this bad stuff in their water system that people are consuming.
Yeah.
That's why it's called the Flint water crisis.
Right.
So the first question I have for you is: do you think if they added orthophosphates earlier into their water system, Flint wouldn't have this problem today?
Well, obviously, I think because um, there's other leads, I mean, pipes with orthophosphates in them in other parts of the country and the state of Michigan, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, if we specifically we're talking about like Michigan, there's other places that have it because we didn't hear about Ann Arbor having a water crisis. You know what I mean? It just happened to be a predominantly black and brown city that's also in poverty to not have orthophosphates in their lead, I mean, in their pipes. So it absolutely would have prevented it. And really, I think the question is so, from my understanding, that they rerouted the water
Yeah, from
from,
Detroit. Yeah.
yeah, so from Lake, they used to have it from Lake Huron, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they switched it to Flint River because they're trying to like cut down costs or something, like the city.
Yeah.
And my question is not whether they like it would have prevented orthophosphates would have prevented it, is that why didn't they check that the pipes had orthophosphates to begin with before switching?
I also think that they probably were aware of it. They just didn't want to spend more money because more
Yeah,
money means less money. And they weren't really thinking about the community and their health.
right.
They were taking the cheap route,
I believe that, absolutely.
which led to people ingesting lead and contaminants in their water.
Mm-hmm.
That leads me into my next topic issue, which is lead being ingested by kids. By the way, no amount of lead is safe to be ingested by children at all. So, what do you know about the topic? How do you feel about it?
So, like you said, lead is not supposed to be ingested. Um, I believe it was Dr. I think her name was Morna. Correct me if I'm wrong, but she was a pediatrician and she was the first to correlate between like blood levels and
Mhm.
in children and like the lead in the water, right?
Yeah.
So um, it's crazy to me that, I mean, and it's not just like, I mean, you were kind of younger when it happened, so it's like it's kind of new for you, but relatively. But Flint was in a water crisis for years. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like 5 years still. You know what I mean? So, um, like people did, but the government did not care about kids ingesting lead that could literally lead to like developmental issues, brain injury, brain trauma, all of that. It's really pretty egregious, actually. It's very evil, low key.
Like, even one of the governors said that there is no laws, and even if there was a high concentration, like this one woman got her water tested and they had 13,000 parts by billion, when the action law is 15 parts per billion. So that's a way bigger jump until they realize
Right.
it's not safe at all.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
they just started actually caring about schools, but they've addressed the issue, but they haven't done anything to like help the issue, which I think is like really messed up.
No, it's so super messed up. And to think like, I mean, a number of things, right? Like you had people going to City Hall with bottles of water, it being brown, because I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, like, science is your forte. Iron makes the water brown, right?
Yeah.
Um, so you have people going to City Hall, like, hey, I mean, I have clear water right here, praise God, but like, hey, the water's brown. They're just like, yeah, yeah, yeah. You know what I mean? Like, they just didn't care. You're like,
Like go they're like go buy your own water bottles. Like
right, like bottled water's cheap, right? Like Deer Park?
especially
No,
you have to cook, clean, shower, all that stuff.
all of it. Like water is a necessity, and you have people who like were coordinating drives in like little what's the word, functions, um to like distribute water. Like the community had to rely on themselves to get clean water.
Exactly.
Like the government did not do its job at all.
So my question to you about this lead is there's a lot of lead contaminants for children in schools and in home pipe systems, and it's having a big effect on child's development stages. So how do you feel that them not taking the initiative they need to demolish lead and water pipes?
I think in terms of Flint, I think it was like as dramatic as it sounds. I think it's true that it was kind of evil, right? Like they didn't care about Flint, Michigan. People of Flint, 40%, I believe, is under poverty,
Mm-hmm.
and 57% of that is made up of Black people alone. And then it's other minorities. And then there's a small group of white people. So when you think about that, you can't, there's no other explanation besides like environmental racism, right? It's like they didn't think that Black and brown people, especially kids, were like worthy enough to have their water be clean no, ti was expeditiously, okay, right? Like they didn't care. And it's so bad to, it's unfathomable to me that in the United States, like this isn't a third world country, this is the United States, right? Like it's the
Right.
US. Like there's money, and community had to rely on themselves to get clean water, and they let it go on for 5 years and didn't care about the lead poisoning that kids like experience. It's
Mm-hmm.
insane.
What resources do we need to make the change occur?
I think we need to, I mean, I've been saying this, but we need to really consider who we vote for in office. I think different administration, different leadership would have absolutely prevented this. And I think that's evidence in like different areas. Even like in Detroit, like Ann Arbor didn't get anything. It's like a college down, University of Michigan's there, predominantly white population, didn't have a water crisis. Like it's people in Calabasas not going to have a water crisis. It's not going to happen to them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we have to hold our politicians and our government accountable, especially when they're killing and literally like deterring people's lives, especially Black and brown kids.
I'm
It's
pretty
wild.
sure there was like 12 lives lost from a certain disease from that was coming from the water.
I'm sure. And I think about what's going to happen years from now. God forbid, me knocking on wood, but a lot of stuff doesn't. I remember reading. Correct me if I'm wrong. that they investigated like 14,000 kids and
Yes.
from Flint, and all of them ended up having developmental issues, learning disabilities. Um, and you could tell from, and like that young of an age is like when you develop the most, right?
Yes, it's
Ever in
very
your life.
rapid.
So they all developed these cognitive issues, and it's insane to me. But to think like we see that now, but God forbid it gets worse as they get older, because we don't know. Like literally, time will tell if this is the extent of their medical issues, which is already like devastating enough. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, whew, don't get me started, child. It's it's a
So
whole
I have a question for
stuff.
you.
Hmm?
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Since you do live in Atlanta, are you like nervous or scared about lead in your water pipes?
I will tell you, I was never scared of lead or water in my water pipes until Flint happened. And, you know, I always, like most people, think water is a right. Like everyone needs it
Mm-hmm.
to do anything. So I never thought about it until Flint happened. It was a big, I mean, huge news story. And like even still after the press and outrage, it still took them 5 years. But um, to see that like, oh, that's environmental racism. We think about like racism in other aspects. We think of like KKK. We think about Donald Trump. We think about, politicians. We think about the trash neighbor next door, right? You don't think about environmental racism as in like in terms of like classism too, like oh, black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods, or rich neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods. We don't think about like literal water that we all need being
Mm-hmm.
like an element of racism. You know what I mean? Like what?
Do you think
Like
that people in poverty had a bigger effect from this crisis?
absolutely, yeah,
I think that.
absolutely. Uh, no one. It would have never. It would not have happened to any other group of people. Literally not. It wouldn't happen.
Even though they switched the pipes a couple months after the fact, the damage was already done. So
Yep.
then in 2020, the governor passed a law where they directly paid victims. They had a $600 bill settlement that directly paid victims a part of the crisis. But do you think that is enough effort to fully give Flint residents the needed reparations?
I mean, monetary value is nice. Like I think we've talked about like, black people want reparations for slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And like, yes, like money is nice, but that doesn't take away from the fact that you literally affected the health of people. You know what I mean? Like irreversibly, you know? So, I mean, if I don't have a kid, I'm young, right? But like, if I had a kid, you couldn't tell me they gave me $1 million settlement because there was lead in my water. It doesn't change the fact that my kid
Isn't
has all these
harm.
issues now. Yeah, all these issues. Like it doesn't matter how much money I get. Like my kid still got issues because of the negligence or racism that the government did. You know what I mean? The fact that GM, did we talk about this? That GM had like they had the brown water too, and then we're like, hey, no, we don't want that. And like $1 billion company was able to like, oh, let's get our water back from Lake Huron. But literally across the street, people had black water. It's wild.
It really is. Um, My last question to you is about people of color and how they're claiming in Flint that there was systematic and environmental racism played a part in the crisis.
Yeah.
They say this because there was high contaminants in the rivers and water sources and water pipes around their area, but surrounding white neighborhoods had clean Detroit water. Do you believe that the racial bias really played a role in this crisis?
Yeah, like we talked about, like I said, like Ann Arbor, like University of Michigan, like they didn't have a water crisis. GM was able to literally call people up and say, hey, our water's brown from that Flint River switch y'all did. Can you take it back to Lake Huron? And they were like, yeah. And there are so many people in poverty who were not giving that option. It can't, even if it I could forgive if they made the switch and then a few days later there's lead in the water. I'd still chalk it up to racism because they still should have checked for the osteophosphates
Mhm.
um, initially before they switched. I would still claim it as racism, but it wouldn't have been a big deal. I mean, it would be a big deal, but it wouldn't be as big. The fact that it was going on for 5 years and people were complaining for that's half a decade. Like, what do we look like using bottled water for 5 years?
While
Like,
people
what?
over there just using the faucet.
Like, oh, we don't have water. We use bottled water. Like, what? You know what I mean? That's crazy. It can't be anything else but racism.
They're like not the priority.
Mm-mm.
Their little broke town, they don't really care. They're
Mm-mm.
trying to act like they care now, but I don't. They're not. They're not doing everything they can to make it better.
Mm-mm. I mean, how do you feel? Like, do you feel like any other place would have had a more expeditious response?
I don't really know. Like, I think it's just. I think it's just where they're at. Like, their area is poor, which means they don't care. Like, they'll just keep letting them go deeper in the hole. Just let them keep getting poor. And people in the rich areas, they have the money or I guess the power, because I think they're like the image of Michigan. Like they don't want the image of Michigan to look bad, even though there is this crisis. So I guess it's just the area.
Mm. Do you find like you're in Seattle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like whenever I visit you guys, I'm like reminded that you guys are like in a really solid neighborhood, right? Um, do you feel do you see a like wealth disparities in Seattle whenever you guys like you and mom like go out and you see like rougher areas that you think will be like, oh, they would probably have a Flint crisis too. You know what I mean? Or is
I
Seattle
mean,
not like that?
that's a difficult question because some areas you can obviously tell are more high maintenance than others, like Bellevue compared to like downtown Renton or Kent or Tacoma. So
Mm-hmm.
like I would see if there was a crisis, I could see them having immediate action for like Seattle and Bellevue, but for like West Seattle and Kent or Tacoma or places like that are kind of like low, they're in poverty kind of.
Mm-hmm.
I'd see them having
In
a
like a
crisis.
high concentration of like black. I mean, Washington in general doesn't have a high concentration of any person of color, really, but like more black and brown people there and Native American people there, right? Like in
Yeah.
Tacoma and Kent, right?
So yeah, that probably. But I wouldn't. I don't think I really am like worried about Washington's water because they do have pretty good systems and stuff. So I don't think that would be a real issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think Washington in general is very interesting in that they really care about environmental stuff
Mm-hmm.
versus, yeah, you know, really Georgia, okay?
Honestly,
Because they care about the environment. MARTA should have been expanded out to where I live, where we used to live. You know, like people would have. It's a major metropolitan city. We should have had like transportation stuff to like greenhouse gases and stuff. They didn't care. They want everybody to drive.
yeah.
Washington's kind of interesting that they kind of care about the environment. You know, they wear their Tiva sandals and their hydro flasks. It's like a whole thing. you know, so whatever.
I want to thank you so much for letting me interview about the Flint water crisis, and I feel like you had a lot of good insight on the racial side of it. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Oh, thanks for like asking me. I mean, like I said, I'm not in Flint, so I have a limited perspective. But as you know, I'm in the family that like cares about Black people and Black issues all day long.
Mm-hmm.
So you already know I was on it. When it happened, I was like, 24/7 watch. What's going on in Flint, Michigan? I'm gonna go right now. So
Hopefully, Flint has a better outcome for the people there.
right.
All of them.
Yeah. And I like hopefully, we all take some self-reflection to think of how in what unexpected ways, like water and access
Mhm.
to water, affects people of color and how racism manifests in like a bunch of different ways.
Even water.
Even water. Yeah.
So I'll talk to you later.
All right, kiddo. Love you. Talk to you
Love you
soon.
too.
Bye.
Bye.